Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Politics in the Pulpit, a lectionary-based preaching resource designed to ask the provocative question of whether or how politics should appear in our preaching this week. My name is Beth Allison-Glenny. I'm the Baptist minister and the Baptist Union's Public Issues Enabler. Each week I'm joined by a guest from a different place and space on the political or preaching landscape. And this week I'm very pleased to introduce the Revd. Dr. Steve Holmes. He's head of the School of Divinity and principal of St Mary's College of the University of St Andrews. Arguably, I would say, Steve, the very, very best university that you could go to. I might be a little bit biased. Welcome. It's really great to have you on today. Thank you for coming. It's Holy Week this week, and we're going to be looking at the text for the principal service on Easter Sunday. And I always think that Easter Sunday sermon is the one with the kind of the most pressure. Like really got to be able to preach the gospel. And perhaps then is perhaps also the most controversial week for suggesting that maybe politics needs to be a part of that in some way, or something that we're aware of as we're going in. So I guess I wonder, Steve, why have you agreed to come on today? And maybe kind of what does politics in the pulpit mean for you?
So I agreed to come on because this was the date you gave me, Beth, and I always do what you tell me. I don't think. I mean, the human life is inevitably political. If our preaching's real, then it's going to be political, and we can be deliberate about that, or we can do it accidentally. It seems to be far better to be deliberate and say whatever we say is going to have political consequences somewhere along the line. And we need to actually think about what are those? How is this going to be heard in the context we're preaching into, with the people and the issues they're facing, saying whatever it is we say, it will resonate. And we need to actually be aware of those resonances and be responsible to them. Pause, name them, address, say, this could be heard like this, and I'm aware that given what's going on, you might hear it like this, but that's not really what I mean. And so even as the Alleluias ring out on Easter Sunday, we still need to remember those things, I think.
Absolutely. Are there kind of any key social justice issues or news stories or anything that's kind of driving you at the moment that you're thinking like really feels like that's where your heart is at, or your head is at this point?
So we've just finished a fortnight focused on creation care in my own local church, led by our Micah ministry team, who lead us in justice issues. And that's been actually both quite powerful and in certain ways slightly controversial with some members of the church. So I've been thinking a certain amount about that. It began with a sermon from a guest preacher who drew very close comparisons between the renewal of creation and the resurrection of Jesus, which I think has to be right, but some folks found that challenging. And we've talked a bit about it since. So I guess that's where my head's been in these sorts of areas for the last little while. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Well, each week I touch base with my JPIC colleagues and just ask for anything that they kind of particularly want to draw attention to. And I think we're really just aware at the moment that this season is election season. That's very much true for you in Scotland, but also very much true for local elections here in the UK. And it's perhaps something that's kind of going to be not as on people's radars as usual, because of all that is about kind of opening up after COVID, and when we can get our haircut, and when we can hopefully finally see our friends in gardens again. But I think there is something about kind of actually being aware that these they might be small elections, but they can be very, very significant, and that there are election resources available on the JPIC website. So I do a little shameless plug to our own resources and say if you're kind of looking at things and what that might look like, and especially in this kind of COVID season, that there are resources there, especially churches often very important parts for the local community of kind of hosting some of those significant conversations. So just draw attention to that in the kind of news world of this week. So we've got some readings, and we've already had like a pre-conversation, didn't we, about kind of which one? And I said, I mean, surely everybody's just going to be preaching on the gospel, and you're like, but look at Acts. So we've got the principal readings for Easter Sunday, and I'm aware that people have just lived Holy Week, and if they've lived Holy Week with the lectionary, then they may have heard John on Good Friday in the Passion readings, but mostly we've been kind of flitting in and out of Mark to John, John to Mark, Mark to John. We're back in John for Easter Sunday morning. So we've got Acts 10, 34 to 43. We've got 1 Corinthians 15, and we've got the Gospel of John 21 to 18. And people have the option to use Mark instead if they want, but we've gone with John today. So, Steve, is there anything, a particular theme, a particular passage, or something that has jumped out to you from these texts?
I mean, as you said earlier, it's Easter Sunday. You've got to preach resurrection, and it's not easy. And I think there are ways of getting it badly wrong, but you've got to go there, and probably you have got to preach the gospel text. I mean, I took you to Acts while we were chatting, just because, given the theme, a passage that begins, I now realize how true it is that God doesn't show favoritism, but accepts from every nation the one who fears him, feels like a good social justice text. And any other Sunday I'd go there, but no, I think we've got to be in John, haven't we? We've got to be with the resurrection narrative. But as you've just said, we've got to be with the resurrection narrative as the end of the Holy Week story. And that gets us straight to the political. What are we talking about? We're talking about an innocent man condemned by a corrupt regime, occupying forces, executing people to, make a point. That's the story. And that's a political story.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think Mark is really clear about that as well. Just the whole way through, just the kind of language around the cross is just so clearly political. And last week with Palm Sunday, and the kind of the clear clash of culture that was going on here, that there's Jesus on a colt, I enjoyed greatly my local messy church online with the Romans coming in with the sharks from one side, and the colt was Eeyore from the other side, and it was a glorious bit of all age exegesis for that. So we have got this hugely kind of narrative of building up of tension. You can see the factions, can't you? Even in the story, like the kind of the different playoff of who's who and who gets to control, and the crowds that cry one thing on Palm Sunday, crying out for crucifixion by the Friday. And there's clearly something there, isn't there, about how we work as human beings together, and the different fears that maybe drive us as well, and kind of this as well. Like we all play our role in the system. I think we like to pretend that we're always exempt from the system that we're in, but actually I'm not sure we ever are. Not really. So in terms of John, we could get this wrong. You've said, how do we start getting this right? What do you think we should be picking out of this passage this week?
So we just have to focus on celebrating resurrection. I think that I mean it's not politics, but the way to get Easter badly wrong, that I've done it, is after half an hour of worship that rings with hallelujahs, you start saying, but can we be sure the resurrection really happened? And that just kills the service stone dead. So yeah, the resurrection happened. We'll do the apologetics some other time. Let's celebrate. But let's celebrate in a way that's real, that's true to the story, that says resurrection happens after this messiness and injustice and execution, that says that resurrection happens into a world where Israel is still oppressed and occupied. We go to the Acts texts, and who's the one who Peter is amazed can receive the Spirit? It's a Roman centurion. It's a member of the occupying army. Resurrection is not an escape from all those messy political realities. Resurrection is the decisive intervention of God in the middle of them that gives us hope that whatever's going on, whatever injustices are being perpetuated, God can reverse them. God can step in and do something.
And I think I was reading it through earlier. I was really several things that really kind of grabbed me. One is just the pace of that first bit of that John's resurrection narrative. It's the running and the way in the Greek, I think, which we lose in the English translation, is the Greek runs, doesn't it? It's like and it sort of almost sounds a bit gabbled, like, and then they were first, and then he was, and then he caught up, and then he got, and you got this like real sense of almost competition going on between these two guys running to this tomb, and I just really interested that this kind of language of entering in as well, that there's this kind of repetition there, isn't there, of kind of like entering in, like you kept getting into the tomb. And I thought, how Peter is that? you can't just stay out. You're going to get fully in a tomb and find out what's going on. And I still think this idea that of entering into, actually, that's kind of what that's what the whole incarnational story of God has been about, is God entering in, not into the place of life, but then to the place of death. And then kind of, what does that mean? So I think
there's something also. I mean, as you say, there is this kind of helter-skelter sense and competition, but the loser wins. Finally, the other disciple, John, we assume, who'd reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. And it's not the one who gets there first. The one who comes in last is the one who actually gets what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a language about seeing is quite important as well, isn't it? There's all these different words for seeing, and and it seems to be kind of a play that maybe the gospel is playing with that language as well, like kind of seeing and seeing the grave clothes and then believing, and kind of what are we seeing and what are we understanding. And I was really struck that Mary in this almost exegetes the passage for us, that she's kind of saying, she brings this story of the women. We do not know where, that we assume that she's representing maybe a group of women or somebody else. She's already had this conversation before she's gone to the men. We do not even know where he is. And then she's kind of bringing these duties and the concerns of these women, and she's kind of exegeting by saying, what's going on here? We do not understand where he is, and it's like, yeah, that's it, isn't it? We don't yet understand. She's kind of making the point of where is his body? Where is he? What's going on here? And then she obviously is also one who sees, and she uses the different language of seeing. So it's now you didn't actually teach me Greek, Steve, but I'm about to murder this Greek because I can read it on paper, but not at all pronounce it out loud.
Just claim that it's a strange Corinthian dialect that you're reading.
Corinthian dialect. That's definitely kind of 15 years later from. So there's blepe, is that right? For seeing, and then there is also. There are others. So by the time she goes, so there's Aiden,
yeah.
and then at the end there's Hierarcha. Is that right? And there's these different words, and they're kind of playing with each other. There's this kind of and there's theore as well. So there's kind of like these different understanding, you're kind of contemplating, seeing, understanding that's coming through. Now I've just murdered that, Steve, so can you make that make sense?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily get too hung up with the different vocabulary. We can pick out a set of English words like see, watch, observe, and you can use them to, he was watching, but I was observing, sort of thing. Sounds like a Sherlock Holmes line, I suppose. But you can use them to make contrasts, but also you could just use them, and a good author would, just to stop repeating the same word again and again and again. So I don't want to get too hung up on the words, but there's lots of levels of seeing here, aren't there? There's kind of the evidence that's in front of you. And Peter sees the grave clothes. John comes in. He sees and he believes. He sees not just the evidence, but manages to make the connections and gets what's going on. And then Mary, I mean, Mary can't see because she's crying, and then it's the hearing. Jesus said to her, Mary, and she turned and cried, Rabboni, and then she's sent to show, go and not to touch, do not hold on to me, but to show, go instead to my brothers, tell them. And way back with Thomas Aquinas, she is the apostle to the apostles. She's the one who first sent to proclaim the resurrection. And as you say, she's there to do the traditional domestic duties, the messy and unvalued stuff of caring for bodies. That's what she comes to do, and she goes away commissioned as the first ever preacher of the Christian gospel, commissioned by Jesus himself. And let's see the reversals and that are going on there as well.
Yeah, I'm really struck that I spoke to some funeral directors recently who and I was just checking in on how they were as I was taking a funeral, as you do, in the kind of social niceties and just kind of their reflections on how obviously we've clapped, haven't we, for the people who are all about keeping people alive, but we haven't really clapped for those who've been doing the really kind of very sad work of taking away the bodies and caring for those and making sure there's space and that has been a huge logistical challenge for them, at the same time as going in and out of many care homes and getting very sick themselves. And I think I was really struck by the kind of the lack of care this country has given to those who have cared for the bodies, actually, that even that they'd had to ask government to prioritize their vaccines because nobody thought about them, right? But even though they are so essential, and I know anybody who takes a funeral really does know how essential funeral directors are. But I think it was just something I was really struck by, the kind of, we have not cared for their bodies, even though they have cared for the bodies of those who are most beloved to us. And I kind of, it was, it's still an undignified task, I think. Sometimes I think we, perhaps because we're afraid of dead bodies, because they show us something about our mortality, but I don't know what it is there, but it still seemed to be that we kind of, the doctors are great, but those who tend
I mean, it's that unglamorous and unpleasant task of giving dignity even to the dead, but then is scared the right word? We don't believe in dead bodies. We hide them because we don't. We've got this bizarre idea that dying is unusual. It shouldn't happen. Even the vaccine will save our lives. Well, no. Hopefully, it'll prolong our lives by a few decades for some of us. But in the end, the ultimate statistic is still there. 1 out of 1 of us. But it seems to be something that we struggle to believe, and that's actually, I think, really quite significant. Again, trying to preach resurrection. If you're scared of death, you can't preach resurrection. If you're hiding from death, you can't preach resurrection. You have to own the realities. And again, that's of course about privilege. I have the money that when a relative dies, I can pay the best funeral directors in town to go and do all the nice things. Or all the things to make it nice, and then come to a place where there's a carved oak box, and all the evidence. I've not had to go near it. I've not had to deal with it, and it's now nicely hidden away in a beautiful bit of stained oak. But that's privilege. That's I mean, it's normal in the West, but it's still privilege.
I was really struck and taught a lot by being able to be the minister for a while of a very multicultural community where actually the idea that a coffin was closed was not necessarily expected. and certainly that there was a huge expectation that one of your jobs as pastor was to go and be with a body,
Yes.
both in the final moments of life, but often preparing a body for death, and
Yes.
in death, you know, and blessing and anointing that body. And kind of, I was always very struck, for me as a female minister, of this connection, that kind of being able to kind of really hold this story of these women who have anointed Jesus for burial, who then go to do the proper care of this body, and all of the ritual purification rites that needed to go on there, and just the kind of the privilege of it, but also aware the privilege also of being a woman who was free to be able to do that, actually. Because I often think of Mary and the women at the cross, and just, where are the other women? You know, she's speaking for them, but they're not there. And I think, is that because they're at home with the kids? Like, I've got like a really practical head on. It's like, are they not there because they can't be? Because actually, you know, this looks dangerous. Somebody's maybe stolen a body, and actually, who's safe enough to be able to go on their own, to be able to have this conversation? You know, and kind of just, I wonder even here whether there is language about kind of safety and privilege, and even within this very early community of what's going on, who gets to go and have this chat about, even as they're facing authorities and wondering what's going on. So I've often reflected on this Mary.
Do you know Francis Spufford's book Unapologetic? There's a marvelous retelling of the gospel story, which ends with this story of Jesus meeting Mary, and the language he puts in Jesus' mouth is, "Don't be afraid, Mary. More can be mended than you know." I just think that's such a wonderful and powerful and political claim. More can be mended than you know. And then the last paragraph is a single line. The executee helps her to stand up from the floor, or something. It's a wonderful piece of writing.
I will go and look that up. Yeah. So, I mean, last time I'm talking about funerals, very funeral heavy week, clearly. We'll talk about resurrection in the midst of death in a minute. But I think the last time I preached this passage actually was at a funeral. Because the woman had been a keen gardener, and so we're talking about kind of connecting to your ecological stuff, that this language of gardens and Jesus being able to be mistaken for the gardener, because this is a God who's very comfortable with gardens. They seem to appear at key moments of salvation, or not. And so we've got, you know, kind of the Garden of Eden, and we've got this garden. We've had the Garden of Gethsemane already, and then we've got the kind of garden to come of kind of you know, the kind of story of Revelation, and the kind of picture of this kind of new way of being. So I was really struck by that, and I know that I know from my good old St Andrew's days that Tom Wright was very keen for us to realise that this was the first day of a new creation, that this was happening at dawn on the very first day of a week, that we miss it because it's a Sunday now, that we don't think really of Sunday as the first day of the week, but this would have been happening as this kind of ushering in of a new creation, that God is doing something, recreating the world in some kind of fundamental way.
There's I mean, the gardener thing, the gardener's Adam, surely. I mean, there is certainly an Edenic reference here. I think that you know, John's too much into his symbolism not to be meaning that, and so this is new creation, as Tom would say. But this is also a new start for humanity, and if we went into the Corinthians passage and the language of the eschatological Adam, you know, this is we're starting again. As a second chance, a retelling of the story told better this time, and yes, it's right to say that starts at Christmas, or even the Annunciation's just passed, but also I think this garden imagery here points to, here is the moment where actually the possibility is happening.
So when you've been thinking with church around creation care, and kind of the question of how does our care and our stewardship of a planet that we seem to be killing off fit with this story of resurrection? Like, how would you go about answering that?
So, as I say, we had Graham Michael John from the Scottish Baptist College come to preach to us, and he suggested that in the resurrected body of Jesus, we see the prototype of the new creation, which I think that's got to be right. And so then the question comes, or the renewed creation, then the question comes, what's going on in terms of continuity and transformation and healing? And the thing that I lit upon was the one thing we know about the resurrected body of Jesus, it was come just a chapter or two later, or later in this chapter in John, is that the wounds are still visible. And that seems to me such a powerful thing to say if we're talking about creation care. Yes, the world will be renewed when God makes all things new, but the wounds will still be visible. And I think there's our mandate, there's our concern. What can we do so that there are fewer wounds that are visible? What can we do perhaps to tend some of the wounds that are already there so that they will be less severe when the world is renewed?
Yeah. And I mean, these wounded, this is Jesus with his wounded arms and legs, and here is Mary trying to hold him. And here is the story of COVID, isn't it? It's all about seeing at the moment and not about holding.
Yes.
And there's all this language about sight, and we see each other through screens, and we see each other from afar, we see each other through masks, but we can't touch each other, and we're still in that stage of not really being able to touch everybody. And I think for me, the kind of place I would go in terms of kind of starting to preach resurrection this time around would be something around that challenge of not being able to hold on, and what does it mean to kind of look at resurrection, look into a new future when you can't hold on, but you've seen and you have understood something quite significant. And I think I'd kind of want to start, kind of really kind of how do we then, as people who can look at death and have looked at dead bodies and have gone searching inside tombs for them to make sure they're definitely not there, and have seen the angels and have kind of put the pieces together, how do we then start being hope and light to communities that are feeling that, perhaps for the very first time, recognizing their immortality and the huge mental health question that will come as well. I think I have more questions about that than I have answers. But
the first time I preached through a screen actually was last Easter Sunday morning, which was a very odd sermon to try to prepare. And because you couldn't not talk about at that point the staggering reality of an unknown pandemic. And so I tried to kind of talk about the defeat of death, but this defeated monster that was nonetheless staggering through the streets, doing what damage it could before it finally keeled over. And I've thought since then a lot about seeing and screens and so on. And there's, I mean, there's lots there. Paul says to Thessalonians, I long to see you face to face, prosopoli. Now, what's face to face mean? Are we seeing each other face to face now? Well, there's a sense in which we are. There's a sense in which we really aren't. And I think finding the way to, and that's maybe an image of this same living between the times. We know resurrection has happened, but we still see death stalking the streets. We, as you say, we've seen the empty tomb and we've put it together, but we know that in all likelihood our own tombs await us, which one day will be empty too, but between the times. And that kind of sense of grabbing hold of and valuing and rejoicing in the good that we've got, whilst never pretending that there isn't something much, much better coming. And whether we talk about what we can do with video, with online church. Scotland, we were allowed back into the building for the first time just yesterday, Palm Sunday. Am I supposed to pretend we're not recording this on Monday?
We're always very upfront about the fact that we're recording on Monday, partly because the news cycle has usually changed quite significantly.
So, and it was. I mean, it happened. I was celebrating communion, and this wonderful moment where we'd given everyone kind of individual sanitized pots with a little Baptist cup and a cube of bread. But there's this wonderful moment, which only I had, because I was the one at the front, where everyone took their masks off and you suddenly saw their faces properly so they could eat. And it's, that was so much better than what we've lived the past 3 months up here. I know churches have been able to be open down south. But then the masks go back on. And then the song starts and you can't sing it. And you kind of think, and there's this to come, and there's this to come, and there's this to come. And maybe Jesus is risen. Everything is changed. Everything will eventually be changed. Both are kind of true. Let's sing the alleluias and celebrate that Jesus is risen and the hope and the truth there. But let's look for this to come, and this to come, and this to come down the line as well. And that's about our own futures and our own transformations, but it's also about our communal futures and our communal transformations and planetary futures and renewal of creation.
And making sure the world has a vaccine, I think, is
yes, yeah, well, absolutely, yes.
One of my thoughts at the moment. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. It's been really, really interesting to talk to you and reflect with you about this. I'm aware that as ever, I could carry on for another 20 minutes, but that we probably need to draw to a close and people go and do their own thinking and their own work. But hopefully this just gives everyone who's tuning in today just the chance to kind of get a teaser and a taster of kind of how maybe we might reflect on it, and just maybe enough of a starter for 10 that if you're feeling fairly fatigued this week in a kind of week of Holy Week, on your second lockdown Holy Week, having done a year of death and darkness and difficulty, that actually maybe there's just enough here that says, hey, we can sing the hallelujahs with masks on, preferably outside or whatever your risk assessment allows, but we can sing the hallelujahs and know that there is yet hope. We can, having been inside the tombs this year, we can maybe see that God is up to something really remarkable. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for everybody for joining us. So let's go into our politics and into our pulpits with a blessing. May we be anointed with God's Spirit as we bring good news to the poor, proclaim release to the captives, help people to see the world truthfully, and let the oppressed go free. Amen.
Amen.